know that over 95% of big companies actually use automation in their recruitment system at one point or another. So application tracking system where it automatically detects keywords and match what you wrote in your application package to the job description, determined whether or not you would rank high enough for the recruiters to see. Recommender systems actually quite widespread. If you look at big companies across the US, the UK, and also a lot in the Netherlands these days, it's almost impossible not to find one where they would not use automation in the hiring process. However, there's very little known about how candidates would react to the use of automation in recruitment and whether or not it would interact with their experiences of discrimination as well as their self-confidence towards the job. So we use a vignette experiment to study our research questions. So what is a vignette experiment? A vignette survey experiment is technically the type where basically on one treatment, I let you see the entire text with only one bit of text that is different. In this case, the human recruiter, versus the other treatment. So in the AI recruitment treatment, we would have this is an AI recruiter. So in other words, everything in the text stay the same. The only difference is that this is a human recruiter and that's an AI recruiter. We study this behavior by using survey vignette experiment in large groups of the US and UK working adults between the age of 18 and 54. We study 4 things. First, we measure what are their desired job profiles and tasks. Then we ask them to imagine that if they're applying for their desired job profile, how would they answer to behavioral interview questions when they face a human or when they face an automated recruiter. So these are questions where they can just write their answers freely to questions about their strengths, their weaknesses, where do they see themselves in the next 5 years, what are they looking for in the workplace, and what kind of conflicts that they have had and how they would solve it. The next part that we also measure is the counterfactual strategies in terms of how they would self-present themselves when they face human versus AI and how they would estimate their interview chances. Finally, we measure also their self-confidence beliefs and the perceptions of discriminations towards different groups in societies, so men versus women, white versus non-white, migrant versus non-migrant, and finally, whether or not they believe that having AI in recruitment would improve hiring discrimination. So let's first have a look at women. So we already see that when we look at self-confidence of women, they are the group that exhibit less self-confidence when they face automated recruitment. Then when we take a closer look at what they write and how it matches to the job skill descriptions, there we see that for those working in female-dominated job sectors, for instance in healthcare, teaching, etc., women working in this sector write text with higher similarity to the job descriptions that they desire. Now, then moving on to other demographic groups. So when we're talking about, for instance, the white population in our studies, we see that they write more complex vocabularies. They also use fewer words, and they also have more positive emotion words in their interview answers. If we then also take a look at other groups, for instance, based on their age group, we also see a bit of a difference in terms of how the younger population between the age of 18 and 34 would behave comparing to the older group. The younger group, they also use significantly fewer words. They also use more complex vocabularies, but they exhibit not necessarily a lot of assertion and confidence and authority in their text comparing to the older population. So given what we have found so far in the research, we have effectively 3 short advice for 3 groups: the policymakers, the HR practitioners, and also the job candidates themselves. So for policymakers, when we're considering policies to level the playing field for different demographic groups, it is important to take into account that people from different demographics might have different self-presentation strategies, and they might do so differently when there are differences in the hiring process. In our case, human versus AI recruitment. Therefore, when policymakers consider, for instance, anonymous CV, narrative CVs, we have to take into account that in and of its own might not be enough to take away biases. Now, for HR practitioners and companies that are considering different advanced recommender systems or applicant tracking systems, as well as bias mitigations in their system, understanding that removing sensitive attributes such as age, gender, and ethnicity are insufficient to take into account what the system could pick up, especially if you're using more advanced language models to detect how different answer patterns might contribute to a chance of future success. Finally, for job candidates, it is important to understand how the hiring process at the place you want to apply to look like, understanding your rights and being aware about how or whether there are an automated system ranking your profiles. And of course, balancing between optimizing your CV to match the job versus authentically portraying yourself to the employer.